There's this specific art form in music production that I have always been just completely obsessed with. It is the art of the remix. And I do not mean just taking a pop song, speeding it up, and slapping a techno beat on it.
You mean the real craft, like crate digging.
Exactly. I am talking about the producers who spend days in dusty record stores digging through crates of vinyl from the 70s. They find a 2-second drum break from an obscure funk track. Maybe they grab a vocal sample from a 90s B-side, and then they layer their own melody on top of it.
And when it works, you get something that sounds completely fresh, but it is anchored in this deep, resonant history. It feels familiar even if you have never heard it before.
Right. It is a collage of sound. And the reason I am bringing up hip-hop production techniques today is because we are looking at a text that is essentially a masterclass in sampling. We are doing a deep dive into Alma chapter 26 in the Book of Mormon.
Ah, yes, Ammon's big speech, the classic victory lap.
That is exactly how it reads on the surface, right? I mean, Ammon has been a missionary to the Lamanites for 14 years. He has had this wild, successful, highly dangerous mission. He is standing there with his brothers, looking back on everything they accomplished, and he just launches into the speech.
It looks like a spontaneous outpouring of emotion. But our source material for this deep dive argues that it is anything but simple improvisation.
It suggests that this speech is actually a dense, intricate tapestry of literary samples. It is a remix of the highest order.
It really is. Scholars call this intertextuality, which is just a fancy way of saying the text is talking to other texts. Ammon isn't just speaking off the cuff. He is weaving together 3 distinct threads: his own personal memoir, the specific history of his best friend, and ancient biblical poetry.
And the mission for our deep dive today is to figure out why that complexity is there. Because when you start pulling these threads, you realize this isn't just about a guy giving a speech. It forces us to ask some really difficult questions about the production of the book itself.
Specifically, how Joseph Smith, sitting in a farmhouse in 1829, presumably with his face in a hat and no notes, could have managed to hold all these threads together without dropping a single stitch.
That is the production problem, and we are definitely going to get there. But first, we have to look at the samples themselves. We need to see what Ammon is actually doing. And the first layer the research identifies is what they call internal intertextuality.
Which is basically Ammon quoting other parts of the Book of Mormon history.
But not just random history. He is quoting a very specific emotional moment. To understand this, we have to talk about the brothers-in-arms dynamic between Ammon and Alma.
Context is absolutely king here. Because before they were the great heroes, the high priest and the great missionary Ammon and Alma the Younger were essentially the bad boys of Zarahemla.
They were the rebellious sons of the leaders.
Right. They ran around trying to destroy the church. They were actively fighting against their father's work. And then they shared a very specific, traumatic, and miraculous conversion experience. An angel stops them cold. They go through a period of torment and then redemption.
So they have this shared trauma and this shared language of salvation. Now, fast forward 14 years. Ammon is in the middle of his speech in Alma 26. He is describing the Lamanites he has converted, and he uses a very particular set of words.
He says, "They were in darkness, yea, even in the darkest abyss. But behold, how many of them are brought to behold the marvelous light of God."
Darkest abyss, marvelous light of God. Now, to me, if I'm just reading that, it sounds like nice religious language.
It does, until you cross-reference it with Mosiah chapter 27. Go back to that moment when the angel stopped them. This is Alma Ammon's best friend describing his own conversion. He says, "I was in the darkest abyss, but now I behold the marvelous light of God."
Wait, is that a word-for-word match?
It is a precise, distinct cluster. You have the 4-word phrase, "in the darkest abyss," followed almost immediately by the 6-word phrase, "behold the marvelous light of God."
And the research says this is rare.
It is not just rare, it is unique. That specific combination of phrases appears nowhere else in the entire text. It is unique to these 2 men describing this specific transition from hell to heaven.
That gives me chills because it implies such deep intentionality. When Ammon looks at these Lamanites, he isn't just happy for them. He is seeing himself in them. He is using the inside language of his own conversion.
It is an inside testimony.
Nah.
He is signaling to his brothers and to Alma, who's presumably going to read this report later, "Hey, remember how we felt?" That is exactly how they feel.
It is like when you have an inside joke with a friend, but this is an inside spiritual realization.
Exactly. And there's another one that the source material highlights, which is just as poignant. The phrase, "sing redeeming love."
Oh, I know this one. This is from Alma chapter 5, right? The big sermon.
Correct. In Alma 5, verse 9, Alma asks his people if they remember the captivity of their fathers. He says they did sing redeeming love.
Okay, so Alma uses it there.
Now look at Ammon in Alma 26, verse 13. He asks, "Therefore, have we not great reason to rejoice?" Why? Because the Lamanites are brought to sing redeeming love.
Again, are those the only times we see that?
The only two known uses of that exact phrase in the text. Just those two friends, sharing that specific metaphor of singing their redemption.
It really fleshes out the characters for you. It stops them from being these cardboard cutouts of the missionary and the prophet. It makes them feel like two guys who grew up together, face the same demons, and share the exact same vocabulary.
And it suggests that the author of the text, whether you view that as Ammon writing on plates or Joseph Smith dictating, was maintaining a very strict character voice. Ammon sounds like Ammon, but he also sounds like someone who is best friends with Alma.
But the remix doesn't stop there. Ammon doesn't just quote Alma, he also quotes himself. Or rather, he quotes his own resume.
This is the narrative consistency layer. In the speech, Ammon starts listing the specific things they suffered during the mission. He mentions being spit upon, stoned, bound with strong cords, and cast into prison.
Which, if I am just reading quickly, sounds like a generic list of bad stuff that happens to missionaries, like, oh, it was a hard mission.
Right, but the analysis points out that if you look at the previous chapters, Alma 17 through 25, every single one of those things actually happened in detail in specific geographic locations.
So he is not exaggerating for effect.
He is fact-checking his own life. When he says bound with strong cords, he is referencing the incident in the land of Medoni. When he says spit upon, he is referencing the initial rejection in those Lamanite villages. The source argues this adds a layer of historical realism. He is listing his actual scars.
Okay, so we have the internal intertextuality, the samples from his own life and his friend's life. But now we need to talk about the deeper samples, the ones that go back centuries.
The biblical intertextuality.
Because Ammon is a Nephite. He has the brass plates. He knows the Old Testament prophets. And apparently, our research suggests he really, really likes the Psalms.
He loves them. In fact, you could argue his entire speech is structured around the Psalms.
Let's look at the boasting moment, because this is one of the most human moments in the chapter. Ammon is getting really worked up. He is shouting about how great their mission was, and his brother Aaron steps in.
Aaron, the practical one? The buzzkill, maybe?
Right. Aaron basically says, Ammon, I fear that thy joy doth carry thee away unto boasting. He is telling him to tone it down. You're getting a big head.
And Ammon's response is legendary. He says, I do not boast in my own strength, but I will boast of my God.
It is a great comeback. I'm not bragging about me, Aaron.
Yeah.
But you were saying this isn't an original line.
It is a direct remix. He seems to be quoting Psalm 44, verse 8. That psalm says, In God we boast and praise thy name forever. Ammon says, I will boast of my God and praise his name forever.
That is incredibly specific.
It is. And the source notes that this is the only place where those two concepts, boasting in God and praising his name forever, appear right next to each other. So when Ammon snaps back at his brother, he is essentially quoting a hymn.
That is such a power move. Do not critique me, Aaron. I'm quoting scripture.
Exactly. But it is not just that one verse. The analysis calls this clustering. It seems like Ammon's mind is just saturated with the Psalms. He is pulling from Psalm 106, Psalm 149, Psalm 15, Psalm 39.
Give us a sense of this density. How much is he actually quoting?
It is rapid fire. Psalm 106 says, Blessed be the Lord God, and give thanks unto his holy name. Ammon in verse 8 says, Blessed be the name of our God, and let us give thanks to his holy name.
Wow.
And it keeps going. Psalm 126 talks about sheaves and reaping with joy. Ammon builds an entire extended metaphor about sheaves and the harvest.
It is relentless. It is like he is speaking in song lyrics.
That is the theory. The analysis suggests that the Nephites likely had a psalter, a book of hymns or worship music.
Yeah.
And Ammon, having been out in the wilderness for 14 years, probably kept his sanity by singing these songs. So when he finally has this moment of ultimate victory, the lyrics just pour out of him.
That is such a beautiful image. The lyrics of a lost hymnal. It makes you wonder what the melody was for these songs in Zarahemla.
It probably sounded very different than our Gregorian chants, that is for sure. But the content, the heart of the worship was the same.
Okay, so we have established that Ammon is a master of the oldies, the Old Testament. But here is where the track skips. Here is where the remix gets weird.
The New Testament puzzle.
The phantom samples. Because the analysis points out that Ammon also seems to be quoting the New Testament.
Which, for those checking the timeline, is a major problem. Ammon is speaking around 90 to 77 BC, The New Testament won't be written for another 100 years or more. Paul isn't born. Matthew isn't born.
But Ammon uses phrases like Lord of the harvest,
which appears only in Matthew chapter 9 and Luke chapter 10.
He talks about being driven of fierce winds, which sounds exactly like James 3, verse 4. He says, I can do all things, which is the classic verse from Philippians 4.13. And he talks about the natural man, which is Paul in 1 Corinthians 2.14.
So the question is, how is Ammon remixing a song that hasn't been released yet?
This feels like a gotcha moment for critics. Joseph Smith slipped up and copied the New Testament. How does the source material handle this?
It tackles it head on. It presents two main theories, and honestly, they aren't mutually exclusive. The first is what we might call the translation theory.
This focuses on Joseph Smith's role.
Right. We have to remember, we aren't reading the ancient records directly. We are reading the English translation produced in 1829. The theory posits this: how do you translate a complex spiritual idea from an ancient language into English? You use the vocabulary available to you.
So if Ammon expresses a sentiment about God's strength being the only thing sustaining him, Joseph's mind searches for the English equivalent.
And it grabs, I can do all things, because that is the idiom in the biblical language familiar to him that matches the sentiment. It is accessible language. He is translating the meaning, not just the literal words.
That makes total sense. It is like if I were translating a German philosophical concept, I might use a phrase from Shakespeare to explain it to an English speaker, because that is the cultural touchstone we share.
Exactly. The second theory is open revelation, the idea that the source of the inspiration is the same. If the divine taught Paul about the natural man and the struggle of the flesh, why couldn't the same inspiration teach Ammon the same concept centuries earlier?
Truth is truth, regardless of the era.
Right. And metaphors like the harvest or fierce winds aren't exactly copyrighted. They are universal human experiences. So it is likely a mix. Ancient spiritual concepts that align with future Christian teachings, filtered through a translator who speaks the dialect of a 19th century Bible reader.
It definitely adds a fascinating layer of complexity. It is like a double exposure photograph. You see the ancient speaker and you see the modern translator, both present in the text.
And that brings us to the final and I think most critical part of this deep dive, the production problem.
The how did he do it question.
We need to zoom out. We are back in 1829. Joseph Smith is dictating this text.
Let's set the constraints for you listening. No notes, no reference books, no internet. And as the research emphasizes, Joseph has a limited education. He has limited literary skills and limited preaching experience.
So let's look at the intertextual complexity required to fake Alma chapter 26. If an author is making this up as they go, what do they have to keep in their head all at once?
Okay, let's list it out. First, you need to maintain the character voice. You need to sound like Ammon earnest, joyful, poetic, not like Alma, and not like Mormons summarizing things.
Check. Second, you need to remember the specific wording of the conversion story from Mosiah 27. You dictated that section weeks prior. You have to nail that darkest abyss callback perfectly without flipping back to check what you said.
Third, you need to track the geography and events of the last 14 years, of the narrative, the prison, the chords, the spitting, and make sure you do not contradict the story you just told in the previous chapters.
And fourth, and this is the real kicker for me, you need to weave in a dense cluster of Old Testament psalms, paraphrasing them and recontextualizing them on the fly to make it sound like Ammon is quoting his favorite hymns.
And you have to do all of this orally. You cannot write it down, look at it, cross out a line and say, no, that doesn't match Psalm 44, let me try again.
It is a first and final draft.
When you lay it out like that, the naturalistic explanation, the idea that he is just a frontier farmhand improvising a story, it really starts to buckle under the weight.
That is the conclusion the source draws. The complexity is just too high. The web of connections is too tight. You can maybe fake a generic sermon, but can you fake a sermon that is simultaneously a memoir, a callback to a specific best friend dynamic, and a remix of the Psalms, all while dictating to a scribe?
It suggests that the text looks like the product of a mind that is actually steeped in ancient scripture and specific Nephite history.
Precisely.
It is the density of the remix that proves the authenticity of the producer, in a way. The sample clearance list is too long for it to be a bootleg.
That is a fantastic way to put it.
You know, this has completely changed how I am going to read this chapter. It is not just a rah-rah victory lap anymore. It is a collage of his life, his favorite hymns, and his conversion story.
And a window into their culture.
Which leads me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with. We touched on this idea of the clustering evidence and the Psalms.
The Nephite Psalter.
Right. If Ammon is quoting these hymns during his speech, and if the people around him understood what he was doing, does that mean the Book of Mormon is giving us a glimpse into the actual music or liturgy the Nephites used in their daily worship?
It is such a great question. We usually just read the doctrine. We don't think about the ritual or the atmosphere.
Exactly. Like, if you could time travel to a Sunday service in Zarahemla, what are you actually hearing? What did a Nephite church service actually sound like? Are they singing Psalm 106?
It transforms the text from black and white words into something with sound and color. We might be reading the lyrics of their greatest hits.
It makes the civilization feel so alive. Something for you to chew on. Next time you open Alma 26, try to hear the music behind the words.
I know, I definitely will.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. This has been a fascinating look at the layers underneath the text.
Always a pleasure to unpack it with you.
And to you listening, keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will see you on the next deep dive.